In this video, we are going to explain and show a comparison between two texts. One is Death of the Other by Roland Barthes and the other is Sexual Personae by Paglia. To start, in Death of the Other, Barthes tries to give a different viewpoint of the role of the author of a text and its reader. Normally, the role of another is very relevant at the moment of reading a text, but Barthes shows how the author abandons that important position to give it to the reader. Besides, he says that the language is the main tool which creates a text. It has the responsibility of reflecting something on the paper according to him. On the other hand, in Sexual Personae, Paglia points the value of an artist's context in his or her works. Taking into account her perspective, not only the reader has an important role, but also the author behind an artwork is relevant for it. Also, she mentions the way in which art and human nature are related and tries to discover the repressed elements of the contemporary Western culture by making little view through aspects such as religion, pornography, and taboo. Talking in depth about Death of the Author, in first place we are going to mention some live data of Roland Barthes.
Roland Barthes was a French literary philosopher best known for influencing structuralism, semiotics, and anthropology. He was born on November 12, 1915 in Cherbourg, France. When Barthes was an infant, his father was killed in a naval battle. Shortly thereafter, his mother, Henriette Barthes, moved the family to Bayonne, where Roland spent most of his early childhood. In 1924, the Bartheses moved to Paris, where Roland first studied at the Lycée Montaigne. From 1930 to 1934, he was enrolled at the Lycée Louis Le Grand. During his career teaching, Roland Barthes taught at many schools, including in Biarritz, Bayonne, and Paris, as well as other places around the world, such as the French Institute in Bucharest and the University of Alexandria in Egypt. Then he worked in research at the National Center for Scientific Research between 1952 and 1959, later moving into a directorship of studies position at the Practical School of Higher Studies between 1960 and 1976. As a writer, Barthes wrote several books over his teaching career, including Writing Degree Zero in 1953, Criticism and Truth in 1966, and Z in 1970, which analyzed the fiction of Honor de Balzac's Sarrasine. An influential thinker, Barthes delved into complex theoretical concepts and was skilled as an interpreter and a disseminator. He questioned how much one could understand the written word in relation to speech, stating in Image Music Test, a writing task from 1977, "For writing can tell the truth on language, but not the truth on the real."
The Death of the Author, in French, La Mort de l'Actu, is a 1967 essay by the French literary critic and theorist Roland Barthes. The title is a pun on Le Mort d'Actu, a 15th century compilation of smaller Arthurian legend stories written by Sir Thomas Malory. The essay's first English-language publication was in the American journal Aspen No. 5 in the 1967. The French debut was in the magazine Manteia No. 5, published in 1968. The essay later appeared in an anthology of Barthes' essays, Image Music Text, in 1977, a book that also included his From Work to Text. Barthes' essay argues against traditional literary criticism practice of incorporating the intentions and biographical context of an author in an interpretation of a text, and instead argues that writing and creator are unrelated. Analysis. Through the essay, Barthes claims that the author in the real world has not such a significant role. Instead, he mentioned, as soon as a fact is narrated no longer with a view to acting directly on reality, but intransitively, that is to say, finally outside of any function than that of the very practice of the symbol itself. This disconnection occurs, the voice loses its origins, the author enters in his own death. This means that if the author decides to show a character inside the book, discussing or thinking like a sort of soliloquy about a philosophical, metasemiotic or life aspect, then that character becoming the real author of the story developed, and the written figure slowly disappears.
For instance, in the For Vendetta comic, it is supposed that the author is Alan Moore. However, with the advance of the story, the main character V is the one who talks most of the story, developing actions, speeches, and inner thoughts. That idea is strongly defended by Barthes, quoting Marcel Proust. Thanks to that author, Barthes shows how the writer disappears, because Proust doesn't believe in the man who is writing, but in the character inside the novel, who is the one that creates and writes the story. At the same time, Barthes, through the figure of Mallarmé, mentions that it is the language which talks, but not the person. Writing is to reach the point where only language arts and the other is absent. That means that the job of another is to enrich his artwork with a sort of complex or beautiful language, till the point of being forgotten. Not so many people will know a lot of the life of Charles Perrault, but most of the people will recognize the importance of Little Red Riding Hood because of the language and the story created for children. Also, Roland Barthes believes that linguistically the author is dead, because an enunciation can be analyzed without considering the interlocutors, such as what structural analysis Russian formalism does, focused only on the message form, but not in with the message involved.
However, it is impossible for the author to be taken into account in a parallel time with his artwork. It is always a division between before and after. The author is ex before the book. He is the father of the book. And at the same time, it is possible to assert that the author might dissect himself in the book. That is possible because he tries to retake his mainly position in the creation of a book by introducing himself in the form of a character talking through letters, diaries, and memoirs. Moreover, what happened to Orwell in his essay Shooting an Elephant? He introduces himself to the story when he writes, "I was sub-divisional police officer of the town, and in an aimless, pity kind of way anti-European feeling was very bitter." He's talking about himself, of course. However, he's no longer the person birthed in India, but a literary character of his own story. Also, Barthes asserts that to impose an author to the text is to limit its meaning, to close interpretations and the search of senses inside lines. When the author is found, the text is explained. With this argument, Barthes wants to state that every time the reader looks for biography or the background of the author in order to understand or analyze a writing, the only thing that he or she can achieve is the limitation of the meaning, because the doubt of the author will impose bias in the reader. Finally, Barthes states that text is not done by an author. A text is a sort of complex ensemble of quotations, a type of patchwork quilt, composed by many writings, drawn from many cultures, and those aspects.
Camille Paglia, sexual personae. In spite of what Barthes stated in The Death of the Author, note his whole ideas are a paradigm. That is why Camille Paglia shows a different position in regard to the role of the author in an artwork. Camille Paglia, born on April 2, 1947, Endicott, New York City, was an American academic, aesthete, and self-described feminist known for her unorthodox views of sexuality and the development of culture and art in Western civilization. She is a self-labeled dissident feminist and is well known for her scathing outlook on modern culture, especially concerning its portrayal in music, films, and the arts. Bursting onto the scene in the 1970s, she is well known as an academic who loves to challenge the cultural stigma and public reaction to controversial subjects. Paglia experienced the rebellious 1970s as a high school student. Because she was attracted to women in high school, she assumed she was a lesbian, but, as she told Playboy, it was impossible for me to do anything about my attraction to women. Lesbianism didn't exist in that time as far as I knew. I always felt frustrated and excluded, looking in from a distance. This stance marked the beginning of her own rebellion against social norms. Although feeling excluded socially, Paglia excelled academically and in college graduated valedictorian at the State University of New York City at Binghamton in 1968. She went on to spend 4 years at Yale University, earning her PhD in English before taking a teaching position at Bennington College in Vermont. After several such incidents, Bennington reportedly asked her to leave, but with legal intervention she managed to stay until 1979. After Bennington College, she landed a low-paying faculty position as Professor of Humanities at the Philadelphia College of Performing Arts. By the mid-1990s, Paglia was a celebrity, considered among the most well-known social philosophers in the United States. While considered to be at once a humorist, pedant, iconoclast, egotist, and exhibitionist, Paglia and her essays on art, politics, and society were taken seriously by readers, frustrated by the false humility characteristic of the late 20th century, and she has continued to inspire others to reconsider society. From the left, Paglia's writings have provoked animosity, contempt, and outrage.
Background of Sexual Personae. It is a 1990 work about sexual decadence in Western literature and the visual arts by scholar Camille Paglia, in which the author addresses major artists and writers such as Donatello, Leonardo da Vinci, William Shakespeare, Johann Goethe, Lord Byron, and Oscar Wilde. Following Nietzsche, Paglia argues that the primary conflict in Western literature is between the binary forces between the Apollonian and the Dionysian, Apollo being associated with order and symmetry and Dionysius with chaos, disorder, and nature. Sexual personae began to take shape in essays Paglia wrote in college between 1964 and 1968. The title was inspired by Ingmar Bergman's film Persona, which Paglia saw on its American release in 1968. The work was finished in 1981 but was rejected by 7 major New York publishers before being released by Yale University Press in 1990. The original preface to Sexual Personae was removed at the suggestion of the editors because the book's extreme length, but was later published in Paglia's essay collection Sex, Art, and American Culture 1982.
Sexual personae. In this chapter, Camille Paglia states some ideas which can be considered contra-arguments of Barthes' text, The Death of the Other. The first argument against Barthes' essay is when she mentioned in the text, behind every book is a certain person with a certain history. With this statement, Paglia is avoiding the idea that the author is not important in a piece of writing. To support this argument, the author addresses major artists such as Donatello, Da Vinci, Shakespeare, Oscar Wilde, and so on. A condensation between the words. The word worship has changed what is showed in mass media, especially the pornography. It is a way of demonstrating what nature, the ugliness and violence, does in humans limited to visual expression. Art is a contemplation and conceptualization. When Paglia mentions, pornography is immoral pictorialism will live forever as a rebuke to the humanistic cult of the redemptive word, this means that it is not just what pornography as a concept involves, which is highly linked to a forbidden and dirty conduct, but what really pornography is able to show when it is taken into consideration is the figure of the humans behind the scenes. Notwithstanding, although Paglia mentions the importance of the person behind the art, throughout the time the expression of images has been firstly associated with taboo and appealed to the pagan masses. Italy and the Catholicism added pagan sex and violence to the aesthetic creed. However, today pagan sex and violence have flowered in mass media, showed through famous cinema works such as 50 Shades of Grey. That new way of considering the taboo aspects within mass media is what led Paglia to assert that Western identity has organized itself.
At the same time, it must be mentioned that despite the prevalent moralism present in some parts of the world, the emotional response of reader or art consumer is inseparable from erotic response, due to the fact that it is related to human nature. Art is a scandal to all moralism. Pornography and art are inseparable due to our sensation of feeling vain. Society's repression increases sexual pleasure. On the other hand, Paglia also mentioned an economical part regarding to the art. The idea developed by the author is that these things related to art and human nature reach their economic glorification in capitalism. Capitalism has been inherent to Western aesthetics. Capitalism and art have nourished each other ever since. Possibility of selling artworks, Western culture is animated by a visionary materialism. Also, according to the writer's perspective, she makes a comparison between a capitalist and artist by stating they are parallel type. In fact, she mentions that the artist is just as moral and acquisitive as the capitalist and just as hostile to competitors. Finally, Camille Paglia's idea to be shown in this video is that related to the attempts to eliminate human nature from the other aspects of life. Nature is waiting at society's gates to dissolve us in her Ectonian bosom. There is a reality that is visible for everybody. Sometimes might be considered as a depressive atmosphere because of social problems, and then is when appeared the art expression as a sort of refuge. We may have to accept an ethical cleavage between imagination and reality, tolerating what we will not tolerate in society. Art is a form of struggling to wake from the nightmare of nature.
Conclusion. As a conclusion, we may say that what Barthes exposes in Death of the Other leaves many blanks to fill. He gives the reader all the burden that a text has, but according to Paglia, the context and the ideas of another represents and tells something in the artwork. As we saw, the history of someone who creates an art piece has influence on what is going to be created, and it is almost impossible that the life of an artist doesn't affect what is going to be created. Although the reader and the language have their relevance, they cannot take place of the scripture, talking especially about the task of writing. The reader is the one who gives life to a book, and the language is the way of expressing the ideas. However, for the reader's interpretation, it is essential to know in which period of time or in which historical moment the text of artistic work was done. Additionally, someone must be behind the text to transform his or her ideas into words. In relation with different kinds of artistic works, words, pictures, paints might leave a trace throughout a period of time. However, that mark is unable to exist without the ideas of a person.